Good
Okay.
evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Ian Proud. I'm the peacemonger. I was a senior British diplomat for 24 years, including 4.5 years at the British Embassy in Moscow, during which time I also visited Ukraine on many occasions, actually, mostly to Kiev. But I also drove all the way through Ukraine at the end of my posting, including through the west of Ukraine, through Lviv. Very, very different perspectives on the country from having driven from the east all the way to the west. And it's in that regard that I'm delighted to welcome on Marta Havryshko, who's actually an academic. She's based in Boston, in the US. She focuses on issues related to genocide and that sort of thing, and anti-Semitism. And she's actually a brilliant person to talk about the situation in Ukraine because she's Ukrainian. She's from the west of Ukraine, and she's lived that life and she knows the culture there. So thank you so much, Marta, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I am very happy to be with you today.
So tell me about your upbringing and what it was like, in growing up in Western Ukraine, a young, proud Ukrainian girl. What was it like for you?
I was raised in a very nationalistic way. I was raised in a very poor family, actually, in a very working class family, in very poor family. I remember after the dissolution of Soviet Union, I remember this hunger. And I became a teenage girl and I wanted to be a pretty girl, but we couldn't afford a nice dress. And in a rural area where I was raised, there was a tradition that every Easter, during Easter time and during Christmas time, you should visit church and put your best clothes. And I was obliged to visit church as every good girl, but I was crying because I have only, very old clothes. And I remember this so vividly because we were poor. I remember hunger. I remember like entire winter, we were eating only potato and vegetables from our field. Yes, so I remember this very difficult period. I remember those long, lines. We were standing and waiting for the bread. It was 91, I believe, 90 maybe. So it was the end of the Soviet Union. You know, and our grocery stores were empty, were just empty. And as a child, I was so happy. Last week we went with my son, who is 13 years old, to the supermarket, and we were just wandering. And my son point to very fancy doll, and he asked me, "Mama, did you had dolls like this in your childhood?" And I almost, started to cry. And I started, to tell him, about my childhood. And he was like, "Oh, mom, it's so depressing. Let's talk about something more positive." Yeah, and it's really, it is depressing. But it was common childhood at that time in post-Soviet Ukraine. Yeah, in 1990s. But I must tell that it was the national revival in Ukraine. It was the period when all nationalist forces, especially in the Western Ukraine, started this so-called decommunization, when Eastern Ukraine and Central Ukraine still remain full of monuments of Lenin, Russian speaking in Ukraine. For the first time in Western Ukraine, in my native village, I heard Russian language with my ear only when I turned 16 years old, when I became a student at Lviv National University. When I was in my school, I never spoke Russian language. We never learned Russian language. only Ukrainian language. And guess what? Because of this nationalistic revival and this, flourishing ethno-nationalism, we never learn even Lermontov, Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Bulgakov. It was forbidden. It was taboo. I never learned this. That's why when I met my husband, we were like from different planets. He visited Russian school in Lviv, and I visited very ethno-nationalistic Ukrainian school in a very small rural area. And he knew nothing about Ukraine culture, only some, figures like very prominent Taras Shevchenko, Franco, Lesa Ukrainka, and I knew nothing, almost nothing about Bulgakov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, because in Ukraine it was taboo. It was, those were marked as, disgrace. They were, colonizers, like today. Today we see how their monuments are, dissolved, toppled in Ukraine. Their museums are closed in Ukraine, and politicians are called this decolonization and decommunization in Ukraine. The same was in my Ukraine school. Always vyshyvanka. My music lessons in the schools were all about songs about Ukraine, about history of Ukraine, how we were victims of Russians all the time. And guess what? I never heard word Russian. Russians, to mark Russians, we used only Moskal. Only word Moskal, which is ethnic slur, which is obvious ethnic slur. So when I married my husband, who is ethnic Russian, my entire family asked me, why do you marry Moskal? They never, and until now, majority of my family call him Moskal and my son Moskal. And I became Moskalicha. It's a feminine term to
Yeah, yeah.
Moskal, meaning if you got married to a person who is not nationally conscious Ukrainian, who even has Ukrainian passport, but who is not nationally conscious Ukraine and has ethnic Russian background and Russian blood, he is considered Moskal. Yes. So it's very, so terminology is from Ukraine nationalist movement from mid 20th century. And this nationalist movement was where Bandera movement, was very bloody movement responsible for ethnic cleansing of Poles, for responsible for collaboration with Nazis, responsible for killing of civilian Ukrainians, killing of Jewish people, collaboration in the Holocaust, and killing of many, many Ukrainians, bad Ukrainians. Who were bad Ukrainians? People like me. So many Ukrainian women were killed, were punished by cutting their hair off for so-called horizontal collaboration with Moskals. I remember when I started to fraternize with my husband, some of my friends who were ethnic Ukrainians and very nationally conscious Ukrainians, they started make jokes. Do you know what would happen to you during UPA time? Meaning that my hair will be cut off. Yeah, as a punishment for sexual relations or romantic engagement with enemy men. And this enemy man could be Polish man, could be Jewish man, or could be men who belong to other political party, meaning political rival. Yeah. So actually, I was raised as Ukrainian nationalist, partly because part of my family from mother's side, they belong to Ukrainian nationalists on the ground, and they occupied high-level position. And they were repressed by Soviets. They were sent to Gulag, and part of my family, due to the principle of collective responsibility, were sent to special settlement, and the entire family, together with small children, and entire their property was seized by Soviets. And that's why this, actually, the irony is that my parents now build their home, wonderful home on the land that 100 years ago belonged to their family, and that land was seized, was taken from them by Soviets. And when, Soviet Union was dissolved, then they bought this land, and build their house. So, but our family is very ethnic family. We have many heritage. And when I started to discover those different stories, I understand that it's more complex. Yeah. And all those stories, build more complex, more colorful picture. And it's not black and white. Yeah. It's more colorful, and these truths was very harmful. And many people in my family, they do not want to talk even about this, yeah, because it was uncomfortable, and it was inconvenient. So I started to dig not only family story, but I started to dig this uncomfortable story about Ukrainian nationalists on the ground and their involvement in anti-Jewish violence and in the Holocaust specifically. And starting from this, I became a persona non grata in many circles, including Ukraine academic circles, because many people, when they think about Ukraine, they think that Ukraine is on the road to freedom and democracy, and everything changed since, and Ukraine want to get to European Union, and Ukraine is so modernized and so different from Russia. So I have bad news for them, especially when it comes to Western Ukraine and the history of Ukraine nationals on the ground. When I came to Lviv, my home was located near Roman Shukhevich Street. Shukhevich was the commander of Ukraine insurgent army, UPA. So it was a neighborhood where was Shukhevich Street, Bandera Street, the biggest in Ukraine Bandera Monument, Melnika Street. Melnik is another own leader. And I walked my child to the school that was located in Povstanska, meaning Insurgency Street. So it was all together, and Konovaltsa Street, who is the founder of and the first leader of Organization of Ukraine Nationalists. And in Ukraine, actually, in Western Ukraine, you can't be independent scholar. It's a luxury. Nobody can be independent scholar. You can be patriotic scholar, and you expected to be Ukrainian scholar. What does it mean? You expected to be basically, you expected to produce patriotic history, heroic history about heroic deeds of heroes, national heroes who fight against for Ukraine independence bravely, who were heroes or victims and never perpetrators. My story was not about heroes. My story was about perpetrators, but my perpetrators were their national heroes. And I started to be persecuted by security service of Ukraine, and I started to be bullied by my colleagues. They reported me to Security Service of Ukraine. They lowered my salaries, and my salary became even lower than the salary of cleaning lady in Ukraine Academy of Sciences. And it was terrible. It was really terrible. They wanted me to just leave the job, you know. They started to make my life in academia just, I was a black sheep. They started to make jokes about, because I started to write about sexual violence perpetrated by members of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground. They started to make rape jokes about my sexuality and about also about sexuality of my husband and about sexuality of my father, because my father had at that time cancer. So you can't even imagine this atmosphere. And for me, it was very, anti-Semitic jokes and all this stuff. And for me, it was very difficult to survive because I didn't have any support. Why? Because it's very similar to Soviet times. People are trying to survive. People are trying to secure their jobs. And I couldn't breathe in this atmosphere. And I started to apply for temporal positions at Yad Vashem, at USHMM, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, at Leibniz Institute, at Munich Center for Holocaust Studies, at the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies. And it was every single time, you know, these short periods, half a year, you know, 7 months, 8 months. It was a paradise. It was a paradise because you are not defending your topic. You are not, you know, explaining yourself all the time. You are just making your job. Yeah, you're presenting your job, you are discussing your job. It's like, you know, I was so happy every single time when I just left Ukraine. Yeah, it was, on the one hand, it was not easy because every single time I left my husband and my son, and my son, that's why my son prefer Russian language over Ukrainian, because he spent a lot of time in Russian speaking, you know, with his Russian speaking relatives. Yeah. But it was painful for me as a mother, yeah, on the one hand, but it was very fruitful in and productive in my professional way. Yes, and it was completely different atmosphere because in Ukraine, I was pariah. I was black sheep. I was a traitor for some reason. And I remember vividly last days before Russian invasion of Ukraine, December 1991. My last days in Munich, Center for Holocaust Studies. I just was appointed as director at Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, as director of one of the institute. It was a private, not state actor, yes, memorial actor and academic actor. And finally, my dream come true. And finally, you know, I thought, finally, I'm so happy. I developed, you know, this program and this program. And I was planning, you know, packing my stuff, moving to Kyiv. And I was like, finally, this is completely different atmosphere, and so on and so on. I will be doing this and this and this. And my friend approached me and asked me, did you see this, you know, build up of Russian forces? Did you prepare documents, you know, all the stuff, you know, documents of your child in order to escape from Ukraine? And I was like, no, please, no, don't do this to me. Don't, you know, talk about this reality. And I started to think, you know, for the first time, you know, seriously. And, you know, I study pogroms, I study neighbor violence a lot. And I'm writing a book about the Holocaust where primary perpetrators are locals, our neighbors, our classmates, are, those who turn into other perpetrators one day. Yeah, and I know how this violence can develop. And I started to talk with my friends in Germany, and I understood that if real big war will start, I will have no chance to survive in Ukraine because I will be blamed by my neighbors for what happened to Ukraine. Because even even after occupation of Crimea, because of my topic, I was already blamed for not be loyal, not be good Ukrainian, for undermine this image of Ukraine national resistance and all this stuff. And I was right. When
And
Putin started, yes,
uh, 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 is that at that point that you decided to move to the USA?
yes, actually, yes. When it was started, I immediately decided to leave Ukraine because despite of my new appointment, yes, it was my dream work, but when was started in my head, first first images in my head were images from Lviv pogrom of 1941, and those images of neighbor violence and images of different Jewish women and how they made decisions flee or stay, and how those who made decisions to flee actually survived. um, those who study Holocaust, they maybe, overthink, and maybe they are more, yeah, maybe they sometimes overreact. But I believe in my case, it was good decision. Yeah, so I started to prepare. But my mother at that time was dying from cancer, and my two sisters were pregnant. So I decided to wait a week. They delivered babies, and miraculously, in one day, and it was the birthday day of my mother birthday. So I say hello to both these boys and goodbye, said goodbye to my mother, took my son, 9-year-old son, and we went through Polish border. And then was Warsaw. My son was ill because we spent a lot of time on this, border with thousands of other women, children, puppies, and all this stuff. Then it was Germany. It was, Institute for Social Studies in Hamburg. Then I spent 1.5 years in Basel, and I taught there a course about gender and the war in Ukraine. And I took my nephew with me, and I was single mother in quoting marks with two children, because we didn't know how far Russian tanks will reach Ukraine territory, and I wanted at least save him from everything. Yeah, and I want to help my sister because she was with small baby, and she was taking care about my mother. Yeah, and she was dying from cancer. So I was a single mother, and I was given dozens of interviews to Western media, and I explained them what is going on in Ukraine, and I basically stopped my work on the book about the Holocaust in Ukraine because I started to observe what is going on with sexual violence in Russia-Ukraine war, and I started to dig this topic and watch how this topic is exploited in political discourse by both sides, and all this stuff. What was the reaction? What is the discourse? What is military discourse, political media discourse, and so on and so forth. And then I was invited by Clark University for this wonderful position that I have now. It's Dr. Sand, visiting professor on anti-Semitism and Holocaust pedagogy, and I teach anti-Semitism, racism. Also, I have course on Eastern Europe, where I include Soviet Union and all this, 20th century and Russia-Ukraine war as well, and all this post-Soviet period. And I developed my own course on sexual violence and war and genocide, where I cover different conflicts, including Yugoslav war, Rwanda, so different, and Russia-Ukraine war as well, because for me it's very important, and Holocaust and other conflicts. So nowadays I'm in US, and I'm afraid to move to Europe because of all the stress that I received,
Mm.
and I'm not sure that European countries can protect me because Ukrainian neo-Nazis that threaten me have very well, they are very well connected with European neo-Nazis. So basically, I can be attacked easily in Germany, in Baltic states, especially in Poland. And I don't believe that I can be protected by these states.
Mm.
So I prefer to be in US nowadays because why? Because I believe in First Amendment. I believe in free speech in US. I believe in check and balances despite of all this, rise of far right here, like everywhere in the world. I believe in US democracy, and I believe in institutions here. I'm living in democratic states. I enjoy democracy here and how institutions of civil society work here. I observe this. Our city where I am living is sanctuary for LGBT movement, for example. So I enjoy this. It's very different atmosphere in comparison to my city, Lviv, where you can't even imagine that someone will put LGBT flag. This flag will never survive even 1 minute in public sphere, never. So here is very different atmosphere, and I enjoy US. I enjoy feminist movement here, this tradition of human rights movement, anti-war movement. Actually, we discuss with my students anti-war movement and so on, so forth. I like my students here. It's a great privilege to teach here, and why US is very special for me. When I observe political discourse regarding Russia-Ukraine war in Europe, it gives me headache. Yeah, because here in US, actually, we still have more complex discussion. Discourse here is more diverse, while in Europe, discourse is more what I witness. Many political actors, especially those in power, want this war to prolong, and they put so many efforts to prolong this war. And many think tanks, many intellectuals put their efforts to justify this prolongation of this war. Yes, that's why I am not happy with this, because everything, prolongation of this war is at the expense of Ukrainian lives.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
why here in US we have more diverse discussion and more rational, let's say, voices, and we have a lot of these voices. That's why I am more happy here. Let's say I here I see more realistic vision of
Yeah.
processes in Ukraine and Russia. That's
But
why I'm more,
yeah.
let's say, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And you certainly, I get a headache too, because you certainly don't find any realist discussion here in the UK. And I hate
Yeah.
racists. I really do. I mean, when I drove back, mentioned from Moscow all the way back to the UK at the end of my time, I actually stopped in Auschwitz for the first time. I'm a Christian, but I mean, I've got Jewish friends. I've got my best friends are
Yeah,
Buddhists and Hindus, but I mean, whatever. I mean, people are people as far as I'm concerned. And it's
yeah,
just a really shocking thing to see and to spend time there on my way back. And what's unique about you, Marta, is that you've both fled from the Russians who were invading Ukraine, and you've been pursued by the Ukrainians because of your opinions on the nationalist kind of movement. which makes you, nobody can accuse you of being, I don't think, pro-Russian. I mean, you left the country, when it's being invaded by Russia. Um, so I think that makes your perspective on this, genuinely unique. But it surprises me that nobody. I mean, recently, 2 or so weeks ago, the anniversary of Stepan Bandera's birth, whenever that was, start of January. I mean, you were one of the few people posting about this on X. There's absolutely no discussion of it at all in Western media. The fact that people were marching through Lviv, burning torches with swastika type symbols on their clothing, singing racist songs and that sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, you just never see any discussion of this here, which is, I find it's shocking, frankly. So, thank you for what you do. But I mean, how does it feel to be attacked all the time for talking about things that are actually happening in Ukraine?
Ian, on the one hand, I'm attacked more than 10 years already for all this. So, on the one hand, I used for this, but recently I am attacked not only by Ukrainians. I'm started to be attacked by Western so-called pundits, yeah, by Western think tank, by Western journalists, and who are, for some reason, really believe that by attacking me, they somehow help Ukrainians to advocate their cause, and they really believe that somehow they contribute to war efforts, or they are just being paid. Partly, I believe they are being paid because some of them I know they are being paid because when I see some scholars regularly visiting Ukraine, in Vyshyvanka, and Pinchuk all the time, near them, and so my guess, it's obvious why are they doing this, at least partly. Of course, they have some sentiments to Ukrainians, like many do, yeah, because people are suffering, people are dying, yeah, and many innocent people, yeah, civilian people are suffering because of this war in Ukraine. Yeah, but what I understand that this argument that many people propose to me, even of Jewish descent in the West, that we should keep silent about this Bandera or about using Nazi symbols in Ukraine army because it's not the right time to talk about this. Yes, let Ukraine win the war, and then we will talk about this. Guys, let me remind you, Azov in 2014 was only battalion. Now we have not only Azov Corps, yeah, and we are talking about tens of thousands of people. We have the third Azov Corps, tens of thousands of people, based on the third Assault Brigade, which is led by by Beletsky, and leaders there, like Beletsky, who promote very racist ideas, very nationalistic ideas. Other leaders, Martin, Sasha Martinenko, look at his tattoos. Ku Klux Klan, swastika all over the bodies. Yeah, anti-Semitic tattoos. Yeah, and he is a commander. One of the unit of this brigade used SS Derlevanger Brigade. This Derlevanger is most notorious SS brigade. Most notorious, they were hated even among SS, and they use it as their official insignia. Luftwaffe Brigade. We have Luftwaffe Brigade unit. They are using Nazi Eagle Luftwaffe. Why, guys? According to Ukraine decommunization law from 2015, it's forbidden. They violate even Ukrainian laws. I don't even mention the memory of those who suffered under Nazis. Ukrainian losses during Second World War are huge. They are enormous. Mentally ill children were gassed. They were injected, with these medications in different hospitals. Guys, learn the history. Now we have Nachtigall unit integrated in Azov Corps. Nachtigall, named after Nazi collaborationist unit formed in 1941 in order to attack Soviet Union, and they perpetrated anti-Jewish violence, anti-Jewish pogrom in Vinnytska Oblast in 1941. And they openly say that they picked up this title because Roman Shukhevich, later UPA commander, was the commander of this unit. They praise them openly. Why we should close our eyes? And they openly praise Bandera. They openly create. And, I follow their, let's say, their ideology and how they produce their ideological training, and how they have a lot of fascist aesthetic, a lot of Nazi aesthetic. They base their ideology on the ideology of ethnic nationalism, of organization of Ukrainian nationalists that wanted to build ethno-state. They're homophobic. They want to build anti-democratic state, cult of leader, racism, anti-Semitism, and they are so explicit about this. And when people believe that they will all be gone, somehow they will disappear. Guys, look what they are doing. They train thousands and thousands of new recruits. They have money. They have a lot of sponsors. Recently in Davos, in Economic Forum on Ukraine breakfast, Ukraine oligarch Pinchuk picked up members from this Azov movement. He invited them. Why them? Our army have 1 million persons. Why them? They have explicit support from Zelensky office. For the last time when I visited Ukraine, I was just shocked. I just, walked through the Lviv and took pictures of all, big billboards from with these ads of Azov movements. Nobody had these ads, only Azov. So I had the question, why them? They have enormous support. They are allowed to schools to disseminate their ideas to public schools. They brought I want to say this. Western media are complicit in this. They never talk about what is going on in Ukraine. Ukraine nowadays is training German neo-Nazis who send me on the regular basis Nazi anti-Semitic jokes about Auschwitz. Yes, they train German neo-Nazis. They train French neo-Nazis. They train American neo-Nazis who also send me death threats, and that's why I'm cooperating with FBI about that. And they, are all connected with them. They train Russian neo-Nazis, and the leader of Russian neo-Nazis, White Rex Nikitin, is not allowed, actually, due to the efforts of Germany, even enter to UK, to US, and Schengen zone. and the only paradise for him and other Russian neo-Nazis who escaped from persecution from Russia is Ukraine, is a heaven. They organize concert, and guess what? What is headliner? The group, National Socialist Black Metal Group, with the title Hitler's Hammer. And guess what? The leaders of Russian Volunteer Corps, Belarusian Volunteer Corps, other units which are part of Azov Brigade, under the supervision of Ukraine Security Service and Ukraine military intelligence, in Kyiv during wartime, approximately 1,000 people making Nazi salute and sing song about ovens for Kabbalah children. And nobody asked questions. Nobody asked questions. And you will never find this information in Ukrainian media or Western media. They openly indoctrinate Ukraine using hate, in racism. And what Ukraine will do after the war with all this indoctrinated, well-trained, socialized in lethal violence, crazy boys. What we will do with them? I have a question to their sponsors, to all those who give them Nazi toys and pretend that they are freedom fighters and fighters for democracy and freedom. No, guys, just look at their program and their tattoos. They are not Scandinavian runes. They all about, racism, anti-Semitism. Recently, Blood and Honor. I posted this on my ex. Yeah, they recorded video. They picked up the Berlin to save them. Yeah, to save them from Islam. They are terrorists. They are Nazis. And they are part of Ukrainian military. Legitimate soldiers with pensions, with NATO weapon, with NATO salary, because all of them are sponsored by EU countries. It's just
mind-blowing. And you've been personally threatened as well, haven't you? You've been personally threatened actually on a regular basis with all sorts of violence and various things. Right? Can you say a bit about that?
Yes, exactly. I started to be threatened. I'm threatened on the regular basis by different neo-Nazi units, so by different neo-Nazi actors in Ukraine and far-right actors. And I must say that all of them belong to Ukraine armed forces, to different military units. So officially, they are heroes. They are freedom fighters. They are heroes. So when I complain, people say to me, so report to police. When FBI agents ask me, why you didn't file a report to police? And it made me laugh because, I explained them that SBU, is, connected to those guys, they are basically under the umbrella of those guys. Many of those units are under the umbrella of Hur, Budanova, this military intelligence. I explained them how it works basically in Ukraine. So you're not protected in Ukraine. Those guys are SBU. Those guys are police, actually. Yeah. So you can't be protected. That's why I asked them, to do something. And they just, they just said, yeah, you shouldn't go to Europe. Basically,
Ah,
we do not recommend. Yeah, you shouldn't go because they have good connections there. So it's not the good idea. That's why I'm trying to avoid all conferences there. And because of those threats, they started to be so crazy that I was even contacted by Massachusetts State Police. They contacted my university because they saw on the internet some discussions, because they discuss in their groups what they do to me, because Ukrainian Nazis can't easily go to US. It's not like Europe, yeah. They can't easily go to US, so they are trying to establish some contacts with locals, yeah. They know where I'm teaching, so they started to discuss something in their close groups, monitored by police, and police contacted my university, and they started to yeah. So I also was contacted by them. So nowadays, I'm trying to make some precautions, but you never know, yeah, because those guys we are talking about well-trained, well-organized, um, people who have military experience and who are anti-Semite, actually, and they constantly send me these anti-Semitic memes, about Holocaust, about Auschwitz, about constantly. They just enjoy this, They are very sexist and misogynist. So my gender play a huge role here as well. Yeah, so they obsessed with also with gender, and these play a huge role here as well. And because those threats became so severe, my colleagues even initiated this open letter in July just to attract some attention, because security service of Ukraine and basically those people who should react, because all those actors are under their umbrella. For example, Yevhen Karas, who recently was in London, in Chatham House, who is the leader, who is one of the most prominent neo-Nazi in Ukraine, who organized anti-Roma pogrom in Kiev, whose boy stabbed my friend in Kiev 5 times. Yes, whose boys organized several, attacks on other people and several political killings. Yeah. And who recently received high award from the hands of Zelensky. Yeah, he's promoted in Ukraine by pro-Zelensky journalist. So how can you be protected? Who will protect you when you are threatened by Karas?
yeah.
So
But
it's
Zelensky's
not.
Jewish. What I don't understand, and maybe you can help me understand, it is that Zelensky himself claims to be Jewish. I mean, where does he fit into all of this?
Uh,
I'm
so
not a fan
basically,
of Zelensky, by the way. I mean, I think
yeah.
he's the problem, not the
So,
solution. But
his Jewish identity. So my understanding is he started to discover his Jewish identity only after he became president in 2019, and he started to manipulate his Jewish identity in order, for example, to organize some connections with Israel, to instrumentalize this connection to put pressure on US, for example, to have some gains from Israel, or from US, or from some actors, and some people also instrumentalize his Jewishness in their political games. We hear that Solovyov, even who is himself Jewish as well. Yes,
yep,
so Russian propagandist, Russian
yep,
journalist and propagandist, he complained that Zelensky is a bad Jew, yeah, that he's a capo, meaning, so he's a Nazi collaborator, yeah, so he is a bad Jew who is not a real Jew because he's collaborating with Nazis, yes, but his Jewishness is often used as an excuse. How can you talk about Nazis in Ukraine? They have Jewish president. It's a most common argument when I'm here. So guys, can you imagine Russian volunteer corps is led by Nikitin, who has a Jewish background. White Rex has a Jewish background, guys, okay? And he is sponsored by Nevzlin, who also has Jewish background and Israeli passport, okay? Azov, neo-Nazi battalion, from the very beginning of its existence, when they openly disseminated many photos with Nazi salute, was sponsored by Ukrainian oligarch with a Jewish background, Kolomoisky. Okay? Now, the first march in Kyiv commemorating Waffen-SS Division Galicia in 2021 happened under Jewish President Zelensky. For the first time in Ukraine history, all those marches previously were only in Western Ukraine. The first Nachtigal unit in Ukraine army commemorating Nazi collaborators appeared under Jewish president. The first Derlewanger insignia commemorating SS Derlewanger unit appeared under Jewish president. Unit Vedmedi bears, which is using officially, please check those who don't believe me, which is using SS bolts and SS motto, my honor is loyalty, actually is under Jewish president. How come? Because for Zelensky, Jewishness is not about his real identity. He don't care about the Holocaust. He don't care about, other stuff. He's very flexible. He's very pragmatic. He's opportunist. That's why his Jewishness. Okay, yesterday, the article was published. I gave interview about, maybe you know this tradition, Ukraine century-old tradition about Christmas play, about the born of Jesus Christ, Vertep. Yeah, Vertep. They have very anti-Semitic character Moshko, Zhid. They call it Zhid. Ta? Everyone know that in Ukrainian language and Russian language, Zhid is an ethnic slur, Yevrei. We use Jewish, and Žid remain as a slur, ethnic slur, like Chochol or like Moskali for Chochol for Ukrainians and Moskali for. So, in Ukrainian Vertep, even here in New Jersey, recently, they had this Žid, and he was, very ugly, anti-Semitic, guy with all stereotypes, so very stereotypical character. So I gave a commentary for local newspaper, and I described this, that it was anti-Semitic. So other guy, who also Jewish professor, said, no, it's not anti-Semitic because, Ukrainians elected Jewish president Zelensky. They are not anti-Semites, but guess what? Verteps are most disseminated in Western Ukraine. And Lviv Oblast, which is just obsessed with verteps, Lviv Oblast was the only one where Zelensky actually didn't win. Lviv Oblast elected Poroshenko. Poroshenko won during this presidential race, not Zelensky. And the majority of those who voted for Zelensky were Central Ukraine, East Ukraine, because Because Western Ukraine has very strong tradition of ethnic nationalism. I remember my friend, Jewish, she came from Lugansk after all this, on Donbass when all this, started, was started, and she came to Lviv, and it was Christmas time, and her friends, local friends, started to, organize this Christmas flavor tab, and she saw this, scenario, and she looked at this and asked, "What is that? Žid? It's anti-Semitic." And she was said, "You know nothing about Ukrainian tradition. You are not really Ukrainian. You are from this, Donbass." Many people in Western Ukraine really believe that, real Ukrainians are there. That's why we have this, image of Piedmont, yeah? Only Western Ukraine are real Ukrainians, yeah? And all those, in the East, they are pro-Russian, they have Russian mentality, they don't know Ukrainian tradition. So, but the argument that Zelensky was elected Jewish, that's why we don't have anti-Semitism and we don't have Nazis, is just ridiculous. It's just no
Wow,
way. Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much. That's been so illuminating. I'm sure people will be genuinely interested to hear an honest, a really brutally honest assessment from somebody who knows, from somebody who's lived there and endured harassment and abuse, from her neighbors, which is incredibly sad. And having to flee your country away both from the Russians and the Ukrainian nationalists is makes it doubly sad. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you for all that you do, for your honesty, your testimony, because we're certainly in Europe, certainly in the United Kingdom, we're absolutely starved of any realistic, objective analysis, warts and all, about the situation in Ukraine and the need for this ridiculous war to come to an end. So I praise you for your work, Marta. I hope everybody watching is as inspired and blown away as I've been this evening. Please do like and subscribe to this channel to have more important conversations like this. We've been very lucky today to have Marta join us, and in closing, I just say many thanks, Marta, for being you, and keep doing what you do, and well, stay safe most of all.
Thank you so much, Ian.